So first of all, depending on where in the world you're joining us from, a very warm good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you all. I know that we have participants today in this seminar from all over the world, from all continents, so multiple time zones, as well as from across industries and functions. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome you all on behalf of the INSEAD Africa Initiative and Risk Insights to this webinar on the very important and topical issue of ESG in Africa. My slides seem to have disappeared. Let me see if I can bring them back on because I do need them. Okay. Jabe, can you help me? I think my slides are not functioning. They're not. I seem to be unable to share. There we go. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. So just very quickly to give you an introduction to myself first before I introduce our other participants in the events. I'm Vinika Rao, Executive Director of the INSEAD Africa Initiative and Asia Director of our Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society, which focuses on business as a force for good. I'll take a couple of minutes to quickly introduce you to some of the Africa Initiative activities that I think will be of interest to you all, and then also just tell you about our wonderful partners for today's webinar, Risk Insights, before I tell you about what we're going to be talking about today. Okay. So the Africa Initiative was established relatively recently in 2021. And the idea behind establishing this Center for Research is to be able to enhance learning about the continent, its people, environment, businesses and innovation through knowledge creation and dissemination at INSEAD. And we also hope to be able to contribute to Africa's education, business and policy environment ourselves through sharing our best practices in terms of education and creating a community for intellectual discourse. To this end, our focus areas have been in terms of creating knowledge through supporting academic and applied research from our faculty and creating pedagogical tools like case studies about African companies and African protagonists. We aim to disseminate knowledge that we create with our students and executives in the classroom, but also beyond that community through thought leadership webinars like this one. And we do this by engaging collaborators and experts from the areas of business and policy besides academia, to have the conversations that help to bring about change. We've also recently created a fellowship program to which we invite both distinguished academics as well as leading business people and policymakers. We currently work with 5 distinguished fellows at the Africa Initiative, and in fact, you'll have the opportunity to hear from one of them, Colin Coleman, who will be joining the panel discussion later on. We work with various other parts of the school on our other activities related to our work in Africa, besides the core function of faculty and research. We work with recruitment and admissions to bring in more scholars and executive participants from the continent. We work with career services to create opportunities for internships and jobs, etc., in the continent. And of course, our main function continues to be the creation and dissemination of knowledge. I wanted to give you a sense of some of our upcoming activities that might be of interest. So for one thing, we're very excited about a faculty trip that we're organizing to Africa, to East Africa, where we'll take our faculty to the ground to have meetings with business and government leaders, our alumni, and have site visits with businesses and academic institutions. If you think you can contribute or help in any way with that, by all means, reach out to us. In the area of pedagogical material development, we're very excited about a recent partnership that we've established with the Financial Times. We're publishing a series of mini cases about new businesses in Africa, the first of which was published last month. Now, we are always keen to collaborate, so we'd love to hear from you. These are the various channels that you can use to reach us. I think the best way to stay abreast of our various events and activities are definitely by following us on our LinkedIn page. So do reach out to us. If anything I've said, strikes a chord, or you feel like you can help us or contribute in any way, we're very happy to hear from you. And actually, in a perfect example of the kind of collaboration I'm talking about, we're delighted today to be co-hosting this important discussion on ESG driving positive change in Africa with Risk Insights. I'll take a minute to introduce the company to you. They're a data science company that has created Africa's first ESG rating tool built for Africa by Africans. Their sustainability disclosure tool is known as ESG GPS. RI rates listed companies in all major African exchanges, including South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Mauritius, Botswana, and Ghana. It is the first rating tool in the world that has rated an entire stock exchange. Recently, they pioneered the first AI ESG rating model for private companies. I'm sure you'll agree that's something that's going to be very useful for us all. And for its contribution towards sustainability, Risk Insights have been recognized with a number of awards from the World Economic Forum, Environmental Finance in Europe, the Institute of Risk Management in South Africa, etc. But I want to tell you that what is probably most important to us at INSEAD is the fact that the organization is run by one of our own, an INSEAD alum. You will be hearing more from him soon. That's Andrei Bogdanov, the CEO of Risk Insights. We will be talking today about how future-ready and responsible business and policy leaders in Africa are working to harness the innovation and human resources of the continent to intentionally deliver profit with purpose and create an inclusive work environment which facilitates the engagement of all stakeholders so that ESG activities can help Africa leapfrog other nations in its development journey. In 1987, the UN Brundtland Report defined sustainable development as development which meets the needs of current generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. More recently, the British Academy Future of the Cooperation Programme stated the definition of corporate purpose as producing profitable solutions for problems of people and planet, not profiting from producing problems for either. And yet, it is clear that a lot has happened in recent times that has, in fact, created significant problems for people and the planet. In Africa, we witness climate change, food insecurity, stressed water resources, depleted human health, population displacement, and negative impacts on socioeconomic development. We face the same consequences in many other parts of the world. Many, if not most of the problems that Africa is facing are not of its own creation. And like elsewhere in the world, the consequences of such problems are felt most by those who can afford it the least. We will talk about some of these issues today, but with a focus on the possible solutions to reduce or counter them and the many pockets of opportunity that exist through effective ESG activities. Extraordinarily innovative and effective solutions are emerging from Africa that can benefit not just the continent itself, but also provide much needed ideas for the rest of the world in the ESG space. Now, we have a packed agenda today, as you'll see from this slide that I'm showing you now. We'll start with a keynote address by Mr. Olivier Schwab, MD of the World Economic Forum. This will be followed by a panel discussion moderated by Andrei Bogdanov, who will introduce you to our distinguished panelists who've made time to be with us today. So in the interest of time, let's get started. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to Olivier Schwab, Managing Director of the World Economic Forum. His responsibilities include being head of technology and curation of institutional communities, including the International Business Council. He's earlier been the head of business engagement, executive director of the China office, and head of technology pioneers community. Previously, he was with the Schindler Group in various roles. He's also held consulting roles and very interestingly, even co-founded a regional airline charter service. He has a master's in civil engineering from École Polytechnique in Lausanne and MIT. Olivier will be delivering a short presentation on the topic of Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics Initiative. It's my pleasure to welcome Olivier now. Olivier, thank you so much for making the time to be with us. Over to you.
Thank you, Venika. Thank you for this comprehensive introduction. Let me just share my presentation. I have a couple of slides I'd like to take you through. I don't know if can everybody see it okay? All right. Okay, so just by way of background at the World Economic Forum, and Venika, you mentioned the notion of profit with purpose, right? And this is very much at the core of our organization since we were funded 50 years ago. And what's interesting is that in the past 3 years, this topic of stakeholder capitalism, or I mean, there's a number of names, obviously, ESG, non-financial reporting, but the notion that companies are not just, do not just respond to their shareholders, but to their stakeholders at large, is a topic that's really become front and center very quickly in the past few years. And with that, there's also a regulatory environment that has evolved very rapidly. So from the concept of stakeholders, stakeholder capitalism, to maybe a little bit of a more dry topic, which is how is the regulatory environment moving globally, and what does that mean for companies who do business globally or who are part of global supply chains. So I just want to present a little bit where we've come from on that topic and where we are today, so that you can get a notion of what that means for your businesses. So, this is a 2019, 2020 study, which shows that, businesses have come under increased pressure to report on ESG metrics, either from society or from their investors. So basically, CEOs do feel the pressure, and this has been increasing for a number of years now. Where were we 3 years ago, right? If you look at the reporting landscape, we called it the alphabet soup, a plethora of voluntary reporting standards that companies were being subjected to. On the left-hand side, you have financial reporting. We basically have two standards, IFRS and GAAP, globally. And then on the right-hand side, this alphabet soup of voluntary reporting standards. And basically what happened is the International Business Council, which is a group of 120 CEOs of global companies, came to the forum and said, look, we need to make sense of this a little bit, and we need to find some common denominators. So we worked together with Brian Moynihan, who's the CEO of Bank of America. He chairs the International Business Council. We worked with 4 big accounting firms, and we basically identified a set of metrics which we believe are both practical and pragmatic for companies to start reporting on ESG as the regulatory framework was sort of catching up, if you will. And so we didn't reinvent the wheel. We took what was out there, and we created a set of 21 base core metrics, and then an additional, I think there's an additional 30 or 34 additional metrics for those companies which were a little bit more advanced in the space. And through this work, we also helped converge some of the reporting standards out there, which ultimately led to the creation of the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, under the IFRS, which was recognized as it was founded at COP in Glasgow, which was recognized by close to 50 jurisdictions as being the international body that is now responsible for non-financial reporting metrics. And they took some of the metrics, or they took the metrics which we proposed and into their framework, and we can talk about that. These are our metrics: 4 pillars: people, planet, prosperity, and principles of governance. Again, not reinventing the wheel, but really taking what's out there and, from a business perspective, using it in a pragmatic and practical way. You can see in Planet the TCFD framework, which many of you are certainly familiar with already. So where are we today? We have close to 200 companies who've committed to. We have close to 200 companies who've committed to using these metrics. Over 100 are already reporting on them. So it's quite a momentum, if you will. These are large global companies. And so in the meantime, the regulatory framework has caught up, and so we've gone from an alphabet soup of voluntary reporting standards to now still a somewhat fragmented environment of mandatory reporting standards, right, or mandatory reporting frameworks. We have the IFRS's ISSB, the global one. We have the EU, who's kind of gone their own way, and who had as a mandate, or gave themselves a mandate, to go very quickly and very granular, and I can talk about that very briefly. And then the US SEC, who is still working on some climate framework, which they've been postponing, the release of those, but we believe this year at some point they will release that. So again, very quickly, the timeline. The EU now has a comprehensive set of reporting standards covering the E, S, and the G, and they are coming out with that around this summer. Now, that's for companies based in the EU, but also, of course, for companies who do business in the EU over a certain size. US SEC, I mentioned, sometime this year, and the ISSB is coming out with the climate piece, or the environment piece, also sometime around the summer, and then they'll work on the subsequent pieces. Now, we know the EU and the ISSB are working closely together, because one of the things we've been pushing from our side, together with this group of companies, is to make sure there's alignment, or at least some signposting where it makes sense. So that's being worked on right now. But again, they are different standards. For Africa, certainly, I think the ISSB is the relevant, is my understanding, is the relevant framework, and there's a number of conversation underway. Some of you know the ISSB has built a number of working groups to advise it and to be part of the process as the standards get developed. Just a couple of last slides. I don't want to take too much time. What we recommend is, as the regulatory space is evolving, so two things. One, we support fully the ISSB, and we're in constant conversation with them and serve as an advisory board. And what we recommend is, as regulations in the different countries are starting to take up these frameworks and implement them, we recommend companies to start using our metrics as an on-ramp, right? Because it allows you to organize yourselves around those pillars, which are very closely matched to what the ISSB is going to roll out, and it allows you basically to prepare. If you're a large company, you do business globally, you will need to get familiar with some of the other standards. If you're a smaller company but you're part of a larger supply chain, you will also be subject to some of these standards. And so, starting early, our framework can help with that. Again, here we're in constant conversation with the ISSB and support them. And I think if you go on our website, you'll find also some of our partner case studies, right? So we have a community of 400 practitioners. These are people from the accounting departments, from the CFO departments of our partner companies. They meet on a regular basis. They share experiences. They share best practices. They share the challenges which they have. And we've built a couple of case studies, so you can pick that up and learn for yourself what have some of the experiences been. So I'll stop here. This is an ongoing piece of work, obviously, with the EU moving very quickly, but other jurisdictions also starting now to think about the rollout of different frameworks. So with that, back to you, Vinika.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vinika and Olivia, for providing us with the context for this discussion today. ESG as a driver of the positive change in Africa. Hello, everyone. Welcome, everyone from across the globe to this session on ESG. My name is Andrei Bogdanov, and I'm CEO of Risk Insights. Africa was left behind with regards to ESG. However, continent is catching up. But can we leapfrog the world and drive change based on our challenges as continent? Let's hear today from our panelists. Issues we are facing in Africa are still here. We are working today from Johannesburg, South Africa, as country is experiencing huge electricity shortages. I asked my colleagues to be ready with a plan B in case we go dark for a minute or two, but so please stay with us if we disappear for 1 minute or so. It may happen. I'm very pleased and honored to introduce our distinguished guests today. Ladies first. Let me start with Uto Ukpana. Uto is the company secretary, and she leads sustainability for one of the largest telecom players on the continent, MTN Nigeria. Uto is a legal practitioner, fellow of the Institute of Chartered Secretaries and Administrators. She sits on a number of boards, including the board of United Nations Global Compact Nigeria Local Network. ESG is at the core of MTN's Group Ambition 2025 strategy, and Uto is responsible for embedding and implementing MTN Nigeria sustainability goals. She strongly believes in the integration of economic, environmental, and social objectives into the corporate goals, activities, and planning, enabling long-term and shared value for the company, its stakeholders, and wider society. She's a member of several professional bodies, including the Nigerian Bar Association, the International Bar Association, the Ethics and Compliance Officers Association, United States. She also treasures her role as a wife and mother. My next guest is Colin Coleman, who is a distinguished South African business leader, widely recognized as an influential voice on national and African affairs, and he has played a key role in effecting positive change for South Africa and on continent. He is a former partner and chief executive officer of Goldman Sachs, Sub-Saharan Africa, till his retirement in 2019. Colin currently is a distinguished fellow at INSEAD Africa Initiative. Previously, he served as a senior fellow and lecturer at Yale University. Colin is independent non-executive board director. He is well known as a key architect of China-Africa deal, as well as many others. Our next speaker would be Mr. Jeffrey Adundo. Jeffrey Adundo is the CEO of Nairobi Securities Exchange. He is an accomplished investment banker and has been in financial services sector for the last 30 years, holding senior position in asset management, corporate finance, and securities trading in Kenya. Mr. Adundo serves a council member of the Institute of Certified Financial Analysts. He is member of the Working Committee of the World Federation of Exchanges and a member of the Central Bank of Kenya's Consolidated Fund for Debt Management Committee. Last but not least is Mr. Zano Mataruka, who is Senior Investment Officer of IFC for Sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Mataruka is an International Finance Corporation climate anchor for Sub-Saharan Africa. He is a Senior Investment Officer and Hub Leader for Agribusiness in Southern Africa. Since joining IFC, he spent 4 years in Lagos, 7 years in Johannesburg, and a year with the Climate Business Department at IFC head office in Washington, D.C. Zano's responsibilities at IFC include business development, deal origination, and execution, focusing primarily on Central and Southern Africa. Over the years, Mr. Mataruka has led transactions across Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, Asia, and Latin America. As IFC Sub-Saharan Africa climate anchor, he is responsible for promoting climate business and coordinating with investment teams across the continent. In addition, he acts as the main point for climate-related business and climate strategy in Sub-Saharan Africa for IFC. Today, we are living the era for women. So I will pose my first question to Uto. Telecommunication is the backbone to infrastructure development in any country, ranging from communication, health, safety, security, education, and I can go on and on this list. So naturally, these sectors plays a vital role for inclusivity, which impacts the S factor in the ESG. Uto, MTN is one of the largest telecommunications company on African continent. Could you tell us a little bit more about MTN and how MTN has been driving ESG strategy, taking into account the social compact based on the digital age? Over to you, Uto.
Thank you very much, Andre, and thank you for having me. It's really delightful to be on this panel with other distinguished speakers. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear very well.
Absolutely. Thank
you.
you. I thought I should temporarily, since you've asked the question and focused on telecoms and how MTN and other operators are playing their role in that key sector, to start with this background, and then I'll switch back to the background for today. We in the telecom sector, we believe that connectivity and technology play a crucial role in driving inclusion in Africa and in driving transformative solutions across the continent. And so we find that our role is to connect the unconnected. When you look at the population of Africa, it's estimated to be about 1.4 billion people across the continent. And looking at MTN Group being the largest service provider across the continent, we currently have about a little over 289 million people connected across various operations in 19 countries. And if you look at MTN, if I come home to MTN Nigeria, about over 75 million, that's more than the number of bank accounts, which we have about 34 million bank accounts in Nigeria. So you see that the telecom sector has come to play a definitive role. And one of the things that we've seen that across the spectrum of ESG metrics is that we are here to create shared value. If you look at what's behind me, the Ambition 2025 of MTN Group, it's that we feel that we should lead in digital solutions for Africa's progress. And it's interesting that we are talking about Africa's progress today. So often Africa is seen as the land of challenges, but we believe that Africa is the land of opportunities, and that the more we explore those opportunities, the more we can provide solutions for our people. When we look at the environmental aspects, we have made a commitment, and as well as other telecoms operators. But at MTN, we've made a commitment that we will continue to reduce our Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 emissions. And these largely come from our base stations, our BTS sites. And we aim to ensure that we reach net zero by 2040, and that in terms of also expanding our coverage, particularly in the rural communities, we aim that as part of our Ambition 2025, that we will make sure that there's 95% coverage by 2025. So that's very ambitious, and you see that we're working quite aggressively, at least to ensure that there's 3G coverage in most areas, and upgrading to 4G. And you're aware recently MTN Nigeria got the 5G license, and we're already rolling out. All these are to ensure that we provide the solutions that bring people into the circle of connectivity. In the telecom sector, we're aware that there are other opportunities, particularly in education. Africa has a growing and teeming youth population, and one of the things that we've seen is that there's so many out-of-school children in Africa. And we believe that, telecoms and tech can drive that, improve our literacy and in terms of providing the foundation to ensure that education, it reaches even the child in Damaturu, and I'm mentioning names that probably sound alien to you. Lagos is probably a more familiar name. But this is to make sure that wherever a child is, if you give a child a cell phone, they don't need a manual. They just go ahead and explore and they use it. And we don't see any reason why we shouldn't use such solutions to reach and to improve in terms of digital learning. And while there are challenges with this, we believe that it's really workable and that for Africa to catch up, we need to deploy really technology-driven solutions. Also across the telecom sector, the digital human rights records have also improved. This is because we realize that issues like data privacy, child protection is very important, because as more people are coming online, you also have to ensure that their rights are protected and respected. I will pause there for now, and I'll be more than happy to share more as we go along.
Uto, thank you very much. You touched upon such an important issues, which we can, I'm sure, discuss any of them and have a separate panel on them. But thank you. Telecommunication companies, you made it, I mean, so to look so easy, but driving the initiatives that you have touched on is complex and extremely important. You can't really overestimate the importance of what you just brought in. Because they keep the world safe, as data, as you absolutely correctly said, is key to managing, informing, and strategizing as the world changing, especially at the time of change. Colin, you spent a lot of time in South Africa and abroad. You've been an investment banker almost all your life, and of course, you've been involved in various Africa initiatives across the continent. Continent, I'm talking about Africa, of course, has so much potential due to our access to natural resources and commodities, together with having over 250 days of sun. Yet, we have deep governance issues. How will this new era of governance impact South Africa and the African continent at large? Do you think we have ability to leapfrog over other nations as we enter this new era of governance? The King Code and integrated reporting were born in South Africa, as we all know. So we did play a role, and quite important role, in financial reporting from a governance perspective. But we have had so many structural changes due to poor governance recently. Where do you see governance on the continent in the next 3, 4, 5 years? Colin, over to you.
Thanks very much, and to the organizers for inviting me. Look, I think that when you're talking about Africa, 3, 4, 5 years is a very short time horizon. You know, we have to be a bit more Chinese-like and think in 50 and 100 years leaps of time. The challenges and the opportunities are massive, really massive, and this is why, you know, because nobody's really asked the question, why do we need ESG in Africa, and what are we trying to achieve? Look, the opportunities, as you say, are massive. In effect, the opportunities, if we are to grow the continent by 5 to 6% over the next 40 years, are to create over $20 trillion of GDP growth, which we are currently going to undershoot due to the post-COVID environment. But that's the prize, if you like, for us to grow something in the order of $600 billion of incremental GDP per annum over the next 40 years. The challenge is essentially that the population explosion that we're seeing in Africa, with Africa going from currently 1.4 billion to something in the order of 4.5 billion out of the then 10.5 billion by 2100, is effectively adding huge amounts of share of population in the world with an undersized share of GDP in the world. So currently we have about 3% of a $100 trillion global economy. We have a $3 trillion GDP in Africa, and we are going to be 45% of the world's population, and we're not going to be able to keep up even if we do achieve what I've described as the opportunity, we're not going to keep up with the rise in population relative to GDP. So in order for the people that are left behind to participate and for it to be sustainable, we are going to have to work very hard on inclusion. This is not something just for corporates, by the way. This is something for global, for the G20, for China, for the United States, for European Union to collaborate on. And that in and of itself is a controversial statement, because many people think the United States and China are engaged in a battle for Africa at this point in time. But I have been very vocal in calling for collaboration. The World Economic Forum coined the term, and Oliver Schwab being on reminds me of his father, Klaus Schwab, coining the term coopetition, which was compete and cooperate at the same time. We're going to need something like coopetition around Africa in order to drive ESG from the corporates, from the global companies, from the World Bank, from the IFC, from everyone, in order for us to optimize what is a potential massive threat. What is the massive threat? The threat is we achieve underwhelmingly on GDP growth, but the population explosion happens. And if you have effectively 45% of the world's population sharing something in the order of a low single digit, say 10 to 12% of the world's GDP, will have added a lot of GDP, but many, many millions of people will be bereft, and it's effectively a recipe for human catastrophe, a massive export of people into Europe in particular, because that's where they'll go, and for that to cause massive stress in the geopolitical system. So there is a huge prize for us to cooperate. Now, just one thing quickly, which is how do we manage people's behavior? Because, I always, I struggle even, I have to go to the definition of what is ESG in order to get back to basics. But the fact is, if you're going to drive governance, if you're going to drive social behavior, environmental behavior, you need to have incentives. You need to reward people for doing the right things and punish people and shame people for doing the wrong things. And so I believe that governments having the right alignment and governments having the right rewards for its corporates is very, very important. In South Africa, I'm chairman of something called the Youth Employment Service, which is just around 100,000 paid interns in South African business aged 18 to 29. And we want to ramp this up significantly. But it's been a partnership between the South African government and business, where basically the South African government is giving tax incentives, in effect in the form of a tax rebate to companies who employ youth. You effectively get 25% or so of the wages back through a tax rebate. And you get what's called empowerment, Black economic empowerment credits, which means that people can move a level up on the empowerment scorecard, which then means that they don't have to put the same amount of investment into, for example, equity shares that they would otherwise have to do to get to the same position. So it incentivizes youth employment, and there's nothing more important in South Africa, using this one example, as youth internships to drive the opportunities for youth in South Africa. We have over 60% youth unemployment problem. So I'm using this as one practical example of getting incentives that drive businesses' behavior in alignment with government objectives, and that's good for civil society, good for youth. We could go into many, many examples. But I think that at the moment, I've got to say, there is more space for improvement than there is for the reverse. In Africa as a whole, in South Africa, and the problem, if you look at a place like Nigeria, or if you look at South Africa, or even Kenya, is the rate of inequality, the rate of rise of inequality and poverty is not keeping up with, it's outstripping the rate of improvement of incomes for a certain section of the population. So net, we're getting worse off with respect to inequality, to poverty, to unemployment. even if certain sections of the population is improving. And of course, we want wealth creation in all these countries. That's what will drive jobs and so on. Kenya is doing a great job with respect to growing small business and entrepreneurship and innovation. They're by no means perfect, but South Africa and Nigeria are creating their own oligarch formations and not taking care of driving social welfare and equal opportunity from the ground up. So we're leaving generations of people behind. So massive prizes, massive opportunities, massive challenges. And this is highly relevant. This is not just for Afrophiles, so to speak, people who are interested in Africa. This is relevant for everyone in the world to pay attention. Otherwise, it's going to come and bite them all later on. Thank you.
Colin, thank you very much for these insights. And I would like to pick up on the social cohesion in a few minutes. It's fantastic that you mentioned that the good behavior on ESG should be promoted, rewarded, and using expression also blames and shames on the companies. And obviously, at the end of the day, everything what we do is our governance is overarching those S and Gs. And good ESG disclosure provides the great insights to the quality of leadership and measuring and monitoring thereof, and government role in there as well as the authorities' role in it. It's very important. Let me turn at that moment to Jeffrey. Nairobi Securities Exchange was one of the first exchanges in the Africa to publish ESG voluntary disclosure guidelines and leading the way in East Africa. Jeffrey, from your perspective as CEO of Nairobi Securities Exchange, how do you see the ESG vis-a-vis development of capital markets in East Africa and on continent? How will it drive this positive change, which we all need? And where do you see the positive impact as well as the difficult for adaptation of those principles? Thank you.
Thank you, Andre, and really happy to be part of this conversation. And just reacting to a couple of points that I had from the previous speakers. One, I think technology is the lever that's going to be able to drive the agenda around sustainability, especially now in Africa. I mean, for instance, in Kenya, we have really adopted technology to a very large extent. We have a high level of financial inclusion. If you think about the mobile money platforms that we have, especially M-Pesa, which has now become an ecosystem, allowing small businesses, individuals to transact on a very wide scale and really driving a very high level of inclusion. Our government has also taken an initiative to really support businesses and individuals through a fund which the government has launched, providing cheap credit and affordable credit to masses. And the recent statistic we have is that it has already been able to lend out in excess of $10 million to over 23 million people. So you can see how these transformations are really evolving. Now, back to your question about how do exchanges play their role. Exchanges really are very comprehensive infrastructures. They're very important infrastructures in that they have a very big role of mobilizing capital and also providing access for investors to actually be able to invest their resources and get some level of return. But to the importance of ensuring that there is some level of sustainability as an ongoing basis, I think they can not only allow themselves to be access points for wealth creation and profit making. I think they have to also be responsive in that whichever way you want to do your business, it has to be a responsible way of doing business, and just ensuring that you're adhering towards the impact around environment, your social governance, and really how you respond to the community. So we have that very, very key agenda to drive that. And we have aggregated our initiatives under the umbrella of the United Nations Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, which sort of provides some level of direction towards this. So we are encouraging companies, listed and unlisted, to start adopting ESG guidelines and ESG standards in order to have a very holistic impact approach towards driving sustainability as a key driver. And to do this, we are not just saying it's a good to have. We're actually saying we're trying to draw a link between why it's important to have sustainability and what impact and correlation does it have to business. For instance, we have been able to demonstrate that a strong ESG proposition drives top-line growth. You're able to get expansion interventions easily. For instance, governments are able to license businesses that have a very committed initiative towards providing community support, driving positive agendas to the environment, and so top-line growth becomes one of your key successes. Cost reduction is another one, because you're actually putting your business in areas that are helping improve the environment and not worsen the situation. Things around water, raw material utilization, and there are certain incentives that governments are providing to this. There's a reduced regulatory interventions. I think when businesses are running well, the regulator doesn't have to intervene too much, because they know the governance approach is very strong. They know your how you respond to the society is very strong, and so there's a very great endearing that you get from the government. Employee uplift is good. The productivity is good because they feel that you're a caring employer, you're purpose-driven, you're out there and you're going to support both the business and the people. And really, continuous growth of investments is something that continuously comes into play. But for us to achieve this, it doesn't come easy. I think there's a huge effort that should be put towards building an understanding of ESG. I think if you think about it, we've evolved from corporate social responsibility, where we basically did little things and said we are now compliant with being organizations' good behavior. But we have to go beyond that and adapt corporate social investment so that what we do is not just a good to have, but it has a very direct correlation to the growth of the business. So we have to expand our governance structures, just ensure that we adapt to this. We have to really build a very good understanding of the boundaries and even understanding material topics around ESG. These are areas that we have. And I think in the course of time, I want to advocate that we need to embrace measures and be rated to just assess whether we are doing the right thing. Let it be at a level where there's an independent assessment and you're able to carry this out. So holistically, and just to step into this conversation, exchanges as center points and infrastructures are very central towards driving ESG within their universe, and just making sure they become like the key point of reference of doing that. In Nairobi, we have issued ESG disclosure guidelines that are open to the public, and they help you start building that compliance well ahead of any mandatory compliance that might come in the future. So I'll probably pause there and just leave it for a bit more engagement. Thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for this important perspectives from the exchange point of view. It's great because we are pleased to support Nairobi Securities Exchange as a partner to continue and to play the catalytic role in driving positive ESG disclosure in East Africa, in Kenya, of course, as well as across the continent. Thank you for that. Zana, let me turn to you at this point and ask you hopefully the short question in easy. Considering the role that IFC plays on the African continent to support endeavors in the climate change initiatives both at public and private sector, attempting to assist with the dealing with this risk, to see impact of social cohesion and dissonance driven by the climate change and corporate governance as overarching factors mentioned by Colin. How is the IFC structurally adjusting to assist Africa to drive this positive change towards better governance, improve the social and environmental factors? Thank you.
Thanks, Andre. And I also want to echo the sentiments of my colleagues in thanking INSEAD and the Risk Insights for inviting us to participate in this discussion. And I think this discussion is much more relevant today than at any other moment. And at IFC, what we do is, I think everybody knows that we provide capital to the private sector member countries. And when we do that, it's there are three key issues which we look at. The first one is obviously the projects must be financially sustainable, right? So we look at the financial returns. And the second one, which is really second nature to us, is that the project must be environmental and social sustainable. And the third one, which is consistent with what both Geoffrey, Colin, and even Otto also mentioned, is about what we prefer to call development impact. Well, what are the projects doing in terms of job creation, inclusion, and so on. Now, on ESG, we have a fully fledged department with a couple of hundreds of people focusing on environmental and social governance. We also have a fully fledged department focused on corporate governance. But if I focus on the environmental and social department, what informs our decisions is the IFC sustainability framework. And this sustainability framework has been largely adopted by most of the members of the DFI community. And the sustainability framework has got three key components. The first one is that it defines the roles and responsibilities of IFC and its partners. So, for example, the key role of IFC is we lay out the policy framework in terms of what we expect our clients or our business partners to comply with or to aspire to. We also lay out the access to information policy, which is very important to us. On the clients, what we expect them to do, or our business partners to do, is we have got IFC performance standards, and I'll go through them very briefly. So we lay out the IFC performance standards, which against which we assess a client's performance, and we agree on an environment and social action plan as to how can they get to that stage. So we know that we are very active in some of the least developed markets, and most of the companies we find there may not be up to speed on the E&S issues. Now, we don't exclude them for potential conservation of funding. We actually still fund them, but we agree on an action plan. We say, okay, this is where you are today. These are the action points which we would like to work with you. And that action plan can be 6 months, 2 months, or whatever the period is. And we also have implementation tools we should give them. And these are also outlined in the action plan which we'll have agreed with. And those implementation tools, for example, include our environmental and social procedures, which are also publicly available on our website. And we also give them guiding notes, right, in terms of how do they adhere to some of the issues. If I focus on our performance standards, I'll just pick a couple which are relevant to the discussion based on what some of my colleagues have talked about already. For example, Performance Standard 1 talks about assessment and management of social and environmental risk and impacts. So expect our clients to have an ongoing exercise of assessing the impact which they are having on the environment as well as communities. And if there need to improvements, we expect them to execute those improvements. So if it's, for example, Andre, if it's an 8-year loan which you've gave to a company, it will come with an 8-year supervision program where we visit the client every year and so on. So that is slightly different for us as an institution. Is as much as we rely on some of the publicly available information, when we make investments, we actually go on the ground, engage the company, engage its community, engage its stakeholders, and it is through that process that we then develop an environmental and social action plan. Thank you, Andre.
Zana, thank you very much. And it sounds it sounds as a great plan, because the whole world is in transition, and obviously the companies in Africa they require two things. They require definitely the money, and the IFC is one of the providers of the funding. But more importantly is that direction and guidance. And when you're saying we're setting the plan, it's fantastic, because it's a very sensitive approach, because not that many companies already transformed. They're rather in transition. And that assistance from IFC, not only on the funding, but also with the target setting on ESG, it's critical at this point in time. I'm a bit conscious of the time, so I'll try to ask, and there's so much to discuss. I'll try to asking questions very briefly. Yeah. So Geoffrey, if I may ask you, considering the experience and one of the key elements of the transformation is the role of the woman in the organizations. And I'm putting organizations and business first because that's something which can be managed and we know that it's managed in a number of countries quite effectively, efficiently. So may I ask you to shed some light in terms of the change, women and organization, that has started taking place in Kenya, and Kenya, as far as I know, doing it quite aggressively, in a good sense of that word, aggressively, and how the stock exchange as the regulator addressing gender equality in the capital markets. Jeffrey, over to you.
Thank you for that question. So since 2015, we came up very deliberate and very intentional around how we're going to drive board diversity at the Nairobi Securities Exchange and its actors. And to do this, we embarked on partnerships with a number of organizations. I think the prime one was New Faces, New Voices. That's under the patronage of Gracia Marshall. And using that sort of agenda, we came up with roundtables where we would invite leaderships of the listed companies to a two-day session, sit down with them, share with them some of the aspects and the benefits of having an all-inclusive board. And out of that intervention, the number of companies that participated have over the time been able to improve board representation by attracting or by deliberately ensuring that they have boards that have all genders and also all abilities. So what we've done over time, we've carried out a number of surveys, and the most recent survey done by the UN Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative ranks Kenya as having 25% women on board, above the G20 average of 23%. So there's been a very good improvement in terms of women representation. We have companies that have almost 50-50 balance, both at the senior and at the senior management and the board level. Now, as part of an ongoing intervention, we are promoting transparency on gender equality in the market. Some of the things we're doing is that we've enhanced our disclosure guidelines, and we're providing guidelines for listed companies to disclose board representation. It's actually a key part of our annual reporting, where you provide information both on your board matters, but you include how your gender representation is addressed. We have a tracking and research mechanism that ensures that you're able to get data and benchmark this against other exchanges globally. In 2016, the Capital Markets Authority published codes on corporate governance, and the code essentially provides a guideline towards adopting board diversity and ensuring that there's a high level of inclusion. And where you have not complied, there's a time period to really comply and explain. And we have continuously celebrated the International Women's Day by actually doing a bell ringing at the exchange. And we've carried this both within the city and outside the city, and just to help enhance that. And then we're partnering with other organizations like the UN Women. We are also part of the Global Compact, the 30% Club, and really supporting a number of women on board initiatives in the country. So for us, we've seen value. About 10-15% of our listed companies have women CEOs, and we can see results. So it's becoming a very good currency issue. In fact, the success of what we've done in the private sector has actually attracted government interest, such that they have used our reports to also inform national policy. As a country, we have it in our constitution that we have to have 2/3, 1/3 board representation by either sex at a minimum. So because of what's happening in the private sector, they're using that data to inform appointments in certain government organizations, and also just to build their whole understanding around gender balance and making sure this drives well. So for us, it's prime to us. We're very intentional about it, and we're able to share our studies with the rest of the regions. Thank you very much.
Jeffrey, thank you very much. Your constant efforts in that front, definitely finding the reflection in the numbers year-over-year improvement in that regard. Uto, can I turn to you? And we know that gender equality and representation is still relatively low in West Africa, and MTN is the largest company by market cap in Nigeria. I know driving a lot of agenda, and it's one of them, gender equality. How's the company championing change for women? And are there any KPIs being constructed around it, or are mechanisms? And also, if I may twist it a little bit for you, as a woman leader, are you seeing positive change taking place in Nigeria? Or maybe it's still a little bit too early to ask this question. How do you feel about it? Thank you, Uta.
Thank you, Andrea. Quite a question that requires reflection. And wherever you look, you ask yourself, are we making progress, or are we standing still in one spot, or are we running backwards? I believe that companies have seen that there's great benefits in actually ensuring that women are properly positioned, women are given equal opportunities, women are supported to actually achieve their potentials. Across Africa, not only in Nigeria. I think one of the things that actually is a barrier are the cultural norms. Where the narrative is that a woman should be seen and not heard. It is still quite prevalent, as much as there's a lot of continuous advocacy that continues to go in. Even when a woman is given a seat at the table, the inclusion doesn't immediately come in. So I think that we need a lot of enlightenment, consistent, not only on International Women's Day, to get the message across. It has to be deliberate. I love the example that was given at the Kenyan Stock Exchange, where it is deliberate and purposeful and driven to achieve the desired objectives. Because when you look across, we have positive role models from Nigeria, for example. We have the DG of the International Trade Organization, Dr. Mrs. Okonjo-Iweala. She's been a great role model for young girls in Nigeria, as well as even Mrs. Amina Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General at the UN. And so we must continue to ensure that whether it is in education, I mean, the average father would rather send his son to school than his daughter, and it starts from there. The theme for this year's IWD, embracing equity. Actually, we all have to embrace equity. At MTN, we have set specific targets for gender diversity. And we're working tenuously to ensuring that throughout the organization that we meet those targets. And we're deliberately targeting 50% representation, and whether it is through recruitment, various in leadership. And you see that MTN across its footprints in Africa, you're seeing female CEOs at MTN operations, Rwanda, Cameroon, Benin, and so on. And we're seeing more. But we also have to encourage the girl child to be interested in STEM, because if they are not skilled, if they don't have the right credentials, if they don't have the right exposure, it also makes it difficult to scale up. But there must be meritocracy. It shouldn't be a token gender diversity. I believe that once you create a conducive environment for women to thrive, and also make sure that their voices count, they are heard. So even if I step out of telecoms and look at even financial services, we're seeing a lot of improvement. But sadly, while we're seeing incremental improvement in the private sector, we're not seeing the same in the public sector. If you look at the stats from the general elections that just held into the National Assembly, we have 286 seats in the National Assembly, and only 15 women have been announced as winners for the National Assembly elections. And that's even a reduction from the current National Assembly of 21 women represented both in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. So we must do more. We must advocate policies that enable women to achieve their potentials. It must be deliberate. I mean, women play a significant role in driving the economy, in financial inclusion. To give you an example, example, when we had a recent offer in 2021, we discovered that 44% of the investors were women. And so we must be deliberate about ensuring that women don't just get a seat at the table, but that their voices are heard, and that the cultural norms that say a woman should be seen and not heard, we must do away and throw away such a narrative for the future prosperity of the continent.
Otto, you can't say better than that. It's absolutely must. If we are to transform ourselves as a humanity, that's absolutely must. What you just mentioned at the end, and yeah, Zana, can I put you on the spot very quickly and ask the question: what IFC is doing about it? Meaning that, say, I'm not talking about, of course, Parliament in Nigeria. I'm talking about huge pay gap in Africa, which exists, and not only in Africa. It's definitely disproportional representation of the women on the boards as the CEOs and C-suite. Do you have it as a part of that fantastic, what you described, matrix, which you're applying, and then you're building as you're providing funding with the companies, you are building also this transition plan from where company is to where company should be in terms of the ESG, well, I'll call it compliance. Do you have it as a part of it that's to cover that gap as well?
Yes, the short answer is definitely yes. So what we do is when we make investments, we agree on development outcomes, and gender is one of the key development outcomes. So we literally ask a client, a company to commit that, and they'll give us, the number, and we'll negotiate around the number and say, okay, for example, employment, so much percentage of women by this time, so much percentage of the employees will be women, and so much percentage of the managerial staff will be women, and we hold them to account to that. If they fail to achieve, that becomes one of the key issues for discussion. The other thing which we also do is we have quite a lot of equity investments across Africa. So we've made a commitment that at least 50% of our board members must be women. So it's actually very deliberate. If the target has not been reached, if I put forward a board member who's male and it's done even at departmental level, so my request will be declined if I'm not within the target. Last but not least, we have a fully fledged gender and inclusion department, which is staffed with staff who are spread across Africa. Because remember, at IFC, we just don't do our investments, but we also do advisory. So we've got quite a number of advisory services program which we have. So, for example, in East Africa, we have an advisory service program around refugees, and one of the key components of that program is women involvement. And the women involvement, I'm talking of businesses owned by women. Thank you.
Thank you, Zana, for this. It's really reassuring message. And I know we're running completely out of time, but I cannot miss the opportunity. And Colin, you have played a strong role in the struggle against apartheid and building back South Africa as we know it now, with many other leaders. How, and if we can, use the ESG to drive social inclusivity, which you touched upon talking about it a few minutes ago, to reduce the inequality levels and improve our social factors beyond, and I'm pronouncing this word which is not known outside of South African border, BEE, but I think it's critical. If South Africa can fix that problem, it can be fixed because South Africa is known as one of the biggest in terms of the gap between rich and poor. So do you think we can take ESG may help in fixing that gap, and fixing it, how? You think what would be the key drivers of that? Again, new South Africa, because where we are now is definitely not acceptable. Thank you. You're muted. Sorry.
Thanks, Andre. It's a very big topic, so we don't have time.
I know.
But the essential headlines are: we have to create special economic pathways for those in the economy and those that are not in the economy to benefit from democracy and inclusion and economic growth. We know that economic growth is a precondition, but it may not be a sufficient condition for inclusion and for ESG to effectively make its way across the population. So what are these economic pathways? There's obviously strategies to get economic growth, get exports, production, 24/7 operating hours in the economy, things like that. There is a lot that can be done in the workplace, by which I mean aligning interests of workers and management far more tightly. So, making sure that the economic cycles, the ups and downs of economic cycles are shared proportionally. Just take a gold mine. If the CEO of a gold mine has significant equity and the gold prices, not due to anything that's happening at the mines, go through the roof, as has been the case in the last 5 years, then what tends to happen is you get these massive paychecks to the CEOs and the management, but the workers who are going down the mines are not getting the benefit. So if you have employee share ownership schemes where workers are benefiting in the form of equity in the mines, they also get the leverage on the gold price. So we just got to be smart. And if I had more time, I would go into a lot of practical ideas, but we've got to be smart about how we align the rewards in the workplace so that everybody, all employees, benefit equally from the ups and the downs of the cycle. It's not just that the workers get the downside risks; they should get the upside benefits too. So, and then I think there's a whole bunch of things that need to take place in terms of capacitating the state to be more effective, and that would be true in Nigeria, would be true in South Africa, to clean up the prosecuting authorities, make the police work, get proper business expertise into the infrastructure departments, capacitate. If you can imagine an army of private sector experts available to and effectively under the governance of the government to get that kind of private sector expertise to drive infrastructure projects. I know my friend from the IFC must be very pleased with what I'm saying, because he knows very well that all the players, whether the World Bank or the Chinese or the French or the Germans, are very frustrated in Africa that they have much infrastructure finance, but there's not bankable projects on the ground. And this is to the harm of people on the ground. So I can go on, but it's merely to say the prophets of economic growth who don't argue that we need economic pathways for inclusion are missing a trick. We need to have both growth and economic pathways for inclusion to drive success. And governments, frankly, have to sharpen up their game. They really need to come to the party. Many of them are effectively elites extracting benefits from their people and doing enough to give back to those people only so far as it requires them to get voted back into office. But what do they do in office? They sit on their hands, they extract, they don't do enough to actually drive. And the ethos of, that Chinese state, which, has lifted 800 million people out of poverty. Where is it in Africa? Where do we see the determination, the ethos, the drive, the commitment? I think it's spotty. I could tell you some governments that I think are doing it quite well and making progress. But let's be honest, South Africa has a long, long way to go, and the engine rooms of Africa are failing their people.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you very much. I apologize, it was a short pause. It's so much true, and it's interesting how it resonates also with the global agenda, which is fixing basics, fixing the elites or fixing the government, as well as the more stakeholder capitalism, which is propagating so well by the World Economic Forum, and Professor Klaus Schwab. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, this has been such a great session. We have so many questions to discuss, and I'm saying, unfortunately, again, I would love to continue, but there's all good things coming to the end. Let me please wrap up the event by saying a big thank you to all participants and our panelists, because we're running completely out of time, over time by 20 minutes. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Uto. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Zano. Vinica and team of INSEAD, it was absolute pleasure to work with you, and of course Olivier Schwab and the World Economic Forum team and my team. Thank you for preparing this good session. It has been a great session, giving us hope that ESG will bring that positive momentum to Africa, which is much needed here to realize its hidden potential finally. Thank you all for being with us today. I look forward to see you on our next events. Please follow us on social media. We're publishing a lot, which will be announced via social media, our next events. Goodbye for now, and God bless. Thank you.